So the only reason for the mics is that we are going to record this, and I don't know if you guys want to come up toward the front a little bit more. Or you guys
Sure.
comfy where you are, just a little more cozy. As far as my invite list goes, I am expecting 4 or 5 more folks to be here, so hopefully they'll be here. We'll see. One thing I didn't mention, the last kind of concluding point of the tour, was that we have another part of the facility adjacent to Starbucks, which is comprised primarily of startup companies. There's also a couple, a large lab, and some other sort of, I guess, facilities and assets for the startup companies over there. Anyway, so real quick, I mean, for those of you who don't know SustainOC, just real quick on the organization, we've been around about 10 years. We were Clean Tech OC for the first 8 years of our life, kind of geared with the notion of growing the economy for clean technology in Orange County. We, since in the last couple of years, really have broadened our scope of work, scope of membership, mandate in general to include also sustainability initiatives for local government, big corporations, most of whom now, or a lot of whom are in Orange County are now members. So we're also looking at supply chain management, human capital management, recycling initiatives, but we still really hang our hats and focus in on the clean tech, and those verticals are transportation, water, and energy, of course. So, and obviously the overlap there. And so we've won a couple California Energy Commission grants in transportation and energy, and have really been accelerating a lot into community choice aggregation and smart city. A lot of our membership is kind of pushing us in that direction. So we had our first ever event on smart city with Robert a couple weeks ago, and really that was generated by interest level from our membership and our working groups that we had, kind of pushing us forward in that endeavor. So this is the next follow-on after a discussion that Robert and I had, and what we're hoping to do to achieve is to bring a broad group together over a period of time to discuss how we can go about sort of an aggregated approach to smart city, looking at community, regional, which we're going to go into more depth today. Maybe before I hand it over to you, Robert, perhaps we just go around the room and just kind of introduce ourselves. I know there are a couple people.
Before we do that, maybe explain to the group, because some of the folks here represent the cities in the county. When I first talked to you, we were talking about sort of the focus of driving the 38 cities together in a smart regional plan, right? Can you speak to that a little bit as far as how that's progressed, where it's at in that stage, in the stages?
It's very early, very early, but the whole smart city event that came together was really driven by that notion. So how we can make the whole progress towards smart city more efficient, where we bring not a smart city, but smart cities or communities or regions together to create economies of scale, essentially. That was part of the discussion. How do we do that? Most of our cities in Orange County, they operate so autonomously, so kind of independent of one another, that this has been sort of an aggregating place. So when the discussion came up about a year ago, it's just been ongoing, and it's also been siloed within our organization up until fairly recently. So now we're finally getting out of the gate, talking about it, seeing what we can do to kind of further that aggregated approach through SustainOC. We're doing that in Smart City and to some extent in community choice aggregation. It's all beginning now. The discussions are finally happening. There's real interest level. So that's really where we are.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I just wanted them to hear it because I think you guys are working in like point cities. And so it's interesting to hear the regional perspective. Some of the same cities we're talking to are on your board. So it's kind of interesting to hear both sides of that. I wanted them to hear that. So.
Maybe I should have brought a list of our members, but our membership does include most of the big corporations and about a third of the cities of Orange County. So we're fairly well represented here.
Okay.
So we should do a round of introductions.
Let's do it.
Yeah, here, let me just pass the mic around. This is, again, for recording purposes.
Hi, I'm Mike Darbesi, solutions architect focused on smart cities and IoT.
Weston Terrian, solution specialist with IoT and smart cities with Cisco.
I'm Chris Crosby with Exact. We are smart city data infrastructure and analytics.
Jana Ficini with Cisco. I'm one of the regional sales managers in Southern California.
Matt Lowe, I'm the sales director from Cisco Systems for the West Coast.
Jessica Mickey, I am the account manager for Cisco that covers most of the cities and counties in the SustainOC realm.
Awesome.
Hi, Chris Murray, member of SustainOC's CCA working group, but also a council member at the city of Anaheim.
Good morning. I'm Ken Montgomery. I'm the transportation commissioner for the city of Irvine. So I'm not on staff. I'm a retired city staff. I was 40 years in the local government sector. And now they kind of use me when city staff can't go to a meeting. They said, because I'm retired, they say, Ken, can you go to this meeting? And if there's something really cool, send us an email. So anyway, it's good to be here.
Good morning. I'm Christopher Zhang. I'm from the Western Riverside Council of Governments, and we like to say we have really good relationships with all of our cities. So we're really interested in trying to disseminate this information to our cities.
Awesome. So you guys have met Scott. He gave the tour. I'm Robert Hubbard. I run our ecosystems channels for the Americas. So what that means is I help work with partners that extend our value out to the line of business, right? So Cisco goes up so far with our solution, then we work with partnerships to do integration work and provide managed platforms and things like that, depending upon the use case. What we're going to do today, and this actually started with Scott and I talking, I don't know, 4 weeks ago. He called me up and said, hey, I heard you guys have a pretty good story on smart cities. Can we get you to present to our group? And since then, Scott and I have had a transportation session, 2 weeks ago, where we brought in our transportation team. You'll see more about what Cisco's focused on there, so I know your transportation. But in general, we're seeing, kind of what's happening with SustainOC happening in other areas, right? San Diego's the same way, where the cities have decided we can't all do smart cities independently of each other. It doesn't make any sense, right? Number one, smart cities are not cheap, and the resources that you need to drive that are not cheap. So if we kind of come together, maybe we can form, some good buying power, but also solve problems easier. Because the freeways don't discriminate, right? I mean, the 405 and the 5 don't care what city you're in, right? So solving those problems, as you know, are tricky. But then there's also a whole bunch of other things, right? Public safety, tourism, convention, all of your resident information, all the things that are going on with your citizens, right? So there's a whole lot to figure out, and you can't do it independently. Even within a city, this is sort of the main thing we talk about, is you got all these silos of data. And the water guy's not talking to the parking guy's not talking to the crime guy. But when you put it together, a data scientist can solve some of those problems, right? So that's my role, is to kind of get involved in the line of business layer. And so, really what I wanted to do is I'm going to sort of introduce what we're doing very quickly. You can get more depth from me if you want to, but I'm going to very quickly tell you what Cisco's doing. Then we're going to turn it over to Exact to give a demo of an actual functioning city platform, a smart city. If you guys aren't familiar, I'll kind of go through this in my slides, but Cisco has about 40 lighthouse cities globally now. And transportation, being fairly new for us, has really kind of taken off like a rocket, meaning that a lot of the transportation agencies are really looking for help around how they prepare to modernize. I wouldn't say everybody's pulled the trigger yet, but there's a huge amount of action that's starting to bubble up to the surface around connected, autonomous, electric vehicle, inductive charging, so vehicles in transit being charged. A lot of that stuff is being looked at. So I think that the US is finally coming online the way the rest of the world has, right? So if you go to Europe and other countries, other continents, you see that we're behind quite a bit. And the thing that's interesting is that's the top use case in a smart city, right? As one of my partners likes to say, and I like to steal their ad line, they're in the business of moving products and people. And I think for the cities, if you can do those two things very well, you solve a lot of problems, right? So the cities are kind of it's all coalesced together into one thing. So let's talk about our approach and what's working. We really just we connect the unconnected, right? I mean, that's in a nutshell. Like I said, I'm going to move fast through what Cisco does because it's not about us today. But for the most part, you guys hear about IoT, you hear about Internet of Everything, and all these different things that are going on. All this really is we're networking devices that have never been networked before. So when those devices are networked, you have the ability to control them differently. You have the ability to gather different data points from them. If you're putting things on light poles, why not put 6 or 7 things on the same light pole and share that network, right? So cities now have a lot of different sensors out there that they didn't have, which means they've got real-time data, right? So if you look at the way that most cities operate today, they're operating on historical or ad hoc data, right? Most businesses were the same way about 10 years ago, right? So when you think about the boom that happened in Silicon Valley about 10 to 15 years ago, which I was a part of, it's called the big data boom, right? A lot of companies started competing on their ability to manage real-time data, which means if I can do predictive analytics and figure out where to put my supply chain, I'm going to kill my competitors. And the cities, you think like, well, cities don't really have to compete, but they do, because cities have to compete for private investment, they compete for corporate relocation, they compete for the workforce. So it's a little different, but it's kind of the same, right? The cities that figure this out are benefiting in a major way, and we'll talk about that, right? It's not all about the technology, it's really about what kind of KPIs are you chasing in a city, or what new things can you start to really mature, right? So we connect the unconnected in a nutshell. There's a whole bunch of depth under that about security and all the futures around blockchain and all the things that we do, but you can pretty much guess what a network company's up to, right? So I won't go into that too much. We try to keep things very simple because about probably 3 years ago, a lot of the DOT grants that were coming down, right? The Department of Transportation started really trying to drive innovation around connected and autonomous vehicles. And a lot of that's to do with safety. So the more cars know about other cars on the road and the more that they can gather information real time off of vehicles, they can save lives, right? So wrong way drivers, drunk drivers, people falling asleep at the wheel, people following too close, all of that type of information is coming off of those cars, right? So what Cisco decided to do, now we're in some cars. Cisco actually is in most of the vehicles that you see today that have connectivity. We have a platform called Jasper, so it's a mobile-to-mobile platform. You know, if you're in a car, a Ford, a Chevy, or whatever, and you've got OnStar or what have you, there's probably Cisco in that car, right? If you push the button for OnStar, you're going through a private mobile network back to the manufacturer's call center, and you're using Cisco. So there's a bunch of data coming off of that car that you may or may not know about, right? There's telemetry data, just engine, PM, info, all that kind of stuff. And what Cisco decided to do was, as connected and autonomous and the schedule from the DOT came out, it was, we're not going to allow autonomous until they can actually connect to the road, right? Autonomous is great, and you can have radar and camera and all that kind of stuff where I can see people walking around, but I want the road to actually be authenticated to that vehicle. That's when actual consumers will have autonomous vehicles, when that happens. So the DOT started dropping a lot of funding down to the cities going, if you have the ability to, if you've got the technology capabilities, we're going to start giving out autonomous vehicle proving grounds. We're going to start giving out grants. We're going to start doing a lot of different things. Well, that drove the cities to kind of figure out, like, why didn't we get that grant, right? So the cities were kind of coming back to us going, look, we were told we didn't get the grant because we didn't have the ability to capture their funds and we didn't have a pilot area. Can you help us put together a smart city plan? So if you look at the way Smart City really started, it's because of the DOTs, from my perspective. That's my personal opinion. But if you look at where the money is, that's where it came from, and that's where it's still coming from. There are smart city challenges that are starting to pop up in the US now, and I think that's going to fuel it further. But make no mistake about it, most of the smart city activity was because transportation was driving a lot of pressure down. So we try to keep things simple with these two main families of offers. The Golden Mile and connected roadways are the two things that we talk about. When cities try to talk about, what's your vision of a smart city? What should I be thinking about? Right? I get that question probably 2 or 3 times a week in environments just like this. I'm trying to build a smart city. What should I think about? Where should I start? Right? And it's really very random. I might talk to Orlando, Florida, and their biggest financial contribution is tourism and convention, which is $60 billion a year. Well, let's talk about that, right? Or there's LA, where 40% of the US products come through the port. So let's talk about your port, right? There is no one formula for everybody. There are some similarities, right? Lighting's easy. I can go reduce your cost by doing that. And if we're going to be on the pole, let's go ahead and think about putting an infrastructure up there that we can use for multiple things. So there are some repeatable things, but what we try to do is to get the city leaders to not think about the Visio drawings and all the technology crap. It is, where do you want to start, right? Where do you want to begin the process? If you're Anaheim, do you want to put it near downtown Disney? If you're Huntington Beach, do you want to put it near Main Street? If you're Irvine, do you want to put it near the Spectrum? Where do you want to put your pilot area, which we call a Golden Mile, right? And usually that gets the conversation started in the right way, which is, you know, we didn't think of it that way. We were thinking about systems and different departments and things about like that, right? So anyways, in a nutshell, this is sort of our approach, is to keep it simple. Global deployments, I already talked about, over 40 smart cities worldwide. And these are some of the common domains that we get started with. If you can see there on the right, I hit the button. Parking and lighting are obviously easy, right? And when you think about the easiest way to save money and to potentially fund the project, which is usually the next hardest part. I don't know why that keeps moving. The next hardest part for the city is, how are we going to fund it, right? So obviously they're thinking, look, I'd love to do everything that you're showing me right now, but where am I going to get the money for that? Right? And that's actually not a difficult, I don't know, are you changing the slides or is somebody else changing the slides? That's really bizarre. It's okay, I can stay on that, I guess. The trickiest part is, you know, the funding part, but what we're seeing is there's a whole bunch of companies that want to invest in the cities, right? So public-private partnership is not a foreign object these days. Cisco has programs, but I would say there's a lot of our partners that are like, look, you know, $50 million, I'll invest in that. Let's sit down and talk about what we want. We do revenue share, profit share, debt service. What do you want? So I think at this point, the cities and the different agencies have a decision to make. It's not a matter of whether you can get the money. It's a matter of whether you have the will to do it, right? Because frankly, the money's there. And if you sit down and put together a contract with a city to say, look, I can bring in an operator to run your transportation infrastructure, for example. I can bring in a managed city platform, someone like Exec, who's going to present today. all of that can be written into a financial deal where we provide all the things that you need to navigate this, and you just basically become, someone who uses that contract. So I think it's really starting to move forward, and most of the RFPs that you'll see, we've actually got a gentleman on the line who's running Kansas City for us, among other things, but Kansas City's where he started. They just put out a big RFP, and one of the first things they said was, look, technology, we pretty much have done it all. We're here to talk about public-private partnership for funding, straight up. We want capital, right? And the thing that's interesting is I've got people beating down my door going, I've got money, I want to do it. How do I do it? So it's a bizarre scenario, and I don't know if it's because people, repatriated their capital and that's where that money came from, but it doesn't seem like that's a problem. So we are recognized pretty well by the analysts. We've been at it for a while. When we talk to the analysts, they say, when I call Cisco, I can actually end up meeting a customer who's actually doing this stuff. Instead of like, well, we got a couple of POCs. No, we actually have operational cities. So we're recognized pretty well. We'll talk about, that vision, right? When people ask me, and I get it quite a bit, universities do the same thing. They'll say, what's the vision of a smart campus? What's the vision of a smart city? Or what's the vision of like a transportation infrastructure, a corridor or a connected intersection strategy? What should I be thinking about? And it really all boils down to what you're trying to do. What's the return on investment that we can capture? Because if we can show the results, then we're going to keep funding use case after use case after use case, right? So when I talked about lighting and parking being easy, it's because there's funding that I can go and develop from that. If I reduce your energy bill by $10 million a year, well, I want to broker a deal with you where I get to use that $10 million to go fund the next set of use cases, right? So we're thinking about it from a funding perspective and kind of what we can uncover within your assets that you already have, right? But it's really focused on outcomes, right? And I think that if you look at the cities who've done it early, they're getting a lot of unfair opportunities that other cities don't get. I have no idea why this keeps moving on me, guys. Matter of fact, I'm going to hit escape. The cities that have actually moved early are getting unfair investment dollars, which we'll talk about in just a minute, right? So every city will eventually do smart city, right? It's not a matter of whether you're going to do it. It's just a matter of how fast you do it. That's the way that I've started to look at it, and I think most city leaders, when we talk to the folks that are innovative, like Las Vegas, Kansas City, North Carolina, they're saying, I want to be first and I want to be fast, right? Which then to me means, okay, what's your funding strategy? Who's in charge of this? What are you trying to do? Because they want to be first and fast because they're trying to lure incubators and venture capital to their cities, right? So it's interesting how that works, right? That, when I talked about how in the private sector, Uber came in and really smashed the taxi company with data, right? Airbnb's doing it to hotels, et cetera. It's really no different with cities. And I think to some degree, what people don't realize is that the data, we're putting a network in place that's just capturing a whole bunch of data and video and everything that you have in your environment. But it really comes down to, what do I have for historical data? What kind of real-time data is coming in? What kind of data can I source from the social media? So if I get Facebook, Yelp, LinkedIn, whatever, what can I find out about my environment? What's the sentiment and social analytics of my citizens? Where do they go? What are they happy about? What are they upset about? Where do I see, sort of foot traffic in certain areas? Once you start being able to visualize your city in a real-time fashion, at that point you start having the ability to do prediction. Right? So I don't think people really realize that all of this boils down to data and the ability for you to do prediction, right? Like we've got certain partners that can do things like predict where potholes could be. They can predict where there's accidents that may occur tomorrow, right? Because of 5 years worth of seasonal data and all the things that are starting to sort of combine right now, I can tell you there's going to be an accident tomorrow in this part of the city. So alert fire and police, let them know they should be on the alert. Well, if I can predict things, right, that's a whole other level. Usually people are looking at historical reports. I'm looking at a report in July for June. And that's the way that most of the world is right now, right? Only like Silicon Valley companies that are really on the bleeding edge have the ability to do real-time plus predictive, which means they're looking at, okay, if I ship red sneakers to Tennessee next month, I'm going to sell every single one of them, right? So they're looking at those things. And I think cities are getting better at it. We're going to highlight today some of the best of the best, and you're going to actually get to see their city platform and how they do it, okay? So it really is about outcomes. When people say, what's a vision of a smart city? My question is, we need to develop that vision and we need to understand what you've got for an asset and where we can get a return for you. The technology is easy. I can put a sensor and a camera on anything. Let's sit down and figure out how we generate a return, right? So that's really the main point of this. Creating value across the different constituents. I think that what a lot of folks don't realize is that, like in the case of Kansas City, which we'll talk about in a moment, they really kind of started with trying to serve the underserved neighborhoods. And it's a very interesting component because in one city that I'm in, they went and put a whole bunch of technology into an underserved neighborhood, and the underserved neighborhood is upset because they feel like they've got Big Brother looking at them. So you have that sort of like, you've done so much that now I'm suspicious. Why are you investing so much in my neighborhood, right? So the cities are like, hey, can we go and invest in these more affluent neighborhoods because I need to kind of spread it out a little bit. And, so it's weird. You kind of stumble into these things that maybe you didn't expect. But for the most part, Cisco obviously benefits when we do these types of things. You put in public Wi-Fi for an area, well, guess what I sell? I sell Wi-Fi, right? So there's a lot of those solutions that we have that are building blocks that come up to this. And oftentimes we hear cities talking about, well, I want to work with the local university. Like here we are with UCI and SustainOC and City of Anaheim and City of Irvine are probably thinking, well, I'm going to leverage the local university. And we're going to give them open data sets and they're going to solve all of our problems, right? And I'm involved in these conversations all the time. Well, that's great for R&D. And there should be a place for those grad students to come in and look at your data and solve those problems and write their thesis on it. But eventually you have to go to operations. So that's what is so great about the SustainOC initiative in that if all the cities coalesce together, I can have a pretty doggone good data science team. I got a lot of cities that are contributing to it. And maybe it is that we share that expense as a portion of our GDP. If my GDP is 15% of the total contribution, then I pay 15%, right? That's fair. And now I've got a wonderful platform where I can do all my data analytics and do everything. Those types of strategies are being looked at quite a bit throughout the U.S. Whether it's a 501 that's organizing that, whether it's cities that have figured it out themselves or are trying to put together like a joint powers authority where they actually do that cost share. These types of things are forming together. So it's exciting to watch. So we already talked about data, but just realize there's 3 different things that people are thinking about with data, right? You want to get out open data, of course, because you want to have those opportunities put out into the public. At the same time, there's the intrinsic value of your data, which just means you go and you study for those KPIs and those ROI opportunities. Then there's extrinsic value, meaning I can sell my data. So most city leaders go running for the hills as soon as I say that, right? Some do, not all of them. Some cities are like, no, I'm going to sell my data straight up, no question about it. Vegas would tell you that. Oh yeah, we're selling our data. I'm going to sell it to marketing companies and casinos and I'm going to sell my data, no question about it. I'm going to anonymize it so you can't see any PII. But I am going to sell my data because we think it's worth $400 million a year, right? So whatever that value is, I think that the public sector is now coming to that realization that like data used to be something we had to maintain and it was a liability and I had to back it up and have governance and compliance. The public sector is now realizing that it's also an asset and maybe I should sell it, right? So we're still early in that. And if you talk to most cities, they'll say, nope, we're open data only, it's free, we're not going to charge anybody for it. But if you look at the open data sets that are out there, they publish them once a week, they're not that good. The only way they're going to get to something that they can really do something meaningful with is when they improve the refresh rate of that data, which is expensive, or they enrich that with other data they have to buy. So somebody's got to pay for that expense. There's only one way they're going to cross that hurdle, and that is to partner and to potentially sell the data. So I know it's coming. They just don't know it yet. I've been here before. Private sector said the same thing, but public sector will do it. Okay, this is sort of an estimate of what large-scale city example would be of like putting in lighting and parking solutions. I can share this with you, but I want to I'll move ahead so we can get Kent up to bat here. So let's talk about Las Vegas and Kansas City. Las Vegas started with us, I don't know, 3 years ago or so. And Wes, you might be able to speak to this, but they really put in their first phase of their smart city with us. I think they finished deployment, like just a few months back, right?
Yeah, it finished back in February.
So, they put in the use cases you can see there. And that's really just it was in kind of a smaller area because it's the city of Las Vegas. So if you know that area, the city of Las Vegas is actually not the whole thing, right? Clark County is the bigger piece of the pie. But they really sort of, started driving. And what's interesting is I think Michael Sherwood used to work at the city of Irvine, didn't he? I don't know if you guys know that or not. I think the CIO of Las Vegas used to work at the city of Irvine. Yeah, and he lives in Carlsbad, which is interesting. But anyways, very innovative guy. He's pushing really, really hard to make Vegas the smart city of America, right? So which is, that's sort of that first, I want to be first and fast type deal, right? But these are the use cases they started with, and really it was in sort of a pilot area. Now it's a discussion of, are we getting the return out of those use cases? Do we want to expand those out to more intersections, more city blocks? How do we scale it out? And that's a reality of like what these look like. Nobody's going to go put in the Las Vegas Metro all smart lighting or all smart parking or all those things. They do it in small pilot areas, right? So, but the city has sparked the conversation now with the RTC, which is the local metropolitan planning organization. So Transportation Group is looking at it. Clark County is looking at it. The group that's in charge of the stadium and in charge of the convention center expansion is looking at it, right? Because they're thinking, wow, if we have the data from them, maybe we can figure out that journey of the tourist, the convention goer. What happens from the airplane to the Strip? Who are those people? What language do they speak? What country did they come from? Where do they go at night? What are they saying when they're in our city? What do the South Korean folks say when they're in the old Strip? Do they like it? Do they hate it? What do they like about it, right? Do we have foreign language services? So they're thinking like, wow, we could like really compete with this, because in the case of Las Vegas and Orlando, there's only a couple of folks in the country, in the US, that can compete for some of these big trade shows. And I never knew this until I talked to Vegas and Orlando, but they're like, there's only like 13 of us that can accommodate up to a certain size. In the US, there's 3. Chicago, which I was surprised that they were in the group because their hotels are not that plentiful. Orlando, Vegas, and Chicago are the top 3. And they're like, when it comes to a certain size of an event, we have to compete globally. So we want to know who's coming here from foreign countries, right? And some of that turns into, maybe I want to go visit their city and say, look, are you trying to open up businesses in the United States? Do you want to develop a sister city program? How can we work with you to develop economic development? They want to look at the data because they're trying to figure out how to play offense. Same thing that Kansas City was doing. It was all about the data. It was all about directing investment, directing economic investments into their community. So make no mistake, the sensors and the network are great, but it's about the data, right? Okay, so Las Vegas, it's enough of them. Kansas City, I'm going to actually turn this over to the guy who actually worked on the first phase of Kansas City, which is Kent Nuss. Kent, are you there? He's going to come on.
I'm trying to be here. I've hit mute a few too many times, I think. Are you there?
You're there. We can hear you great. So I'm going to kind of set this up a little bit. Kansas City is one of the most mature smart cities in the United States. So I wanted you guys to get a feel for kind of what that process looked like. Where did they start? How did it all work? Chris Crosby, who's in the room here with Exact, is also the platform provider for the city of Kansas City. So the second part of today, you're going to get to actually see their portal in some other cities as well. So Kent, you want to take it? Can you see the slides?
Yeah, I can see the slides. Thanks, Robert, and hello, everyone. And Robert, I understand I have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to just kind of tell you the story of in a condensed version. We started with Kansas City probably 4.5 years ago now, quickly approaching 5, I think, with our discussions around smart and connected city efforts. And what we found during those discussions with the mayor and city manager and department leads and things like that was really there was an opportunity to tie our smart city effort to a transportation initiative there in Kansas City. They just passed a streetcar line that was going to go through the heart of downtown, and we attached our smart city effort to that larger initiative. And our smart city effort ultimately included public Wi-Fi, kiosk, interactive kiosk, lighting, video sensors with those lights, and ultimately, most importantly, a data platform that we have here in Kansas City. And also layered on top of that is the Exact platform that you're going to hear more about in a little while. What's been interesting to watch play out, though, is a couple of different things. And really, you know, when you deploy technology like the ones I just mentioned and Robert's been talking about, there are certainly outcomes, whether it's revenue generation through kiosk or cost savings through lighting and some other things like that, or public benefit of Wi-Fi, et cetera. There's also been some economic development things that have taken place in Kansas City that I think are interesting and worth sharing. So when the city first sold this concept of the streetcar line going through the heart of downtown, it was under the guise of over the next 20 to 30 years, the city would see about $500 million in economic development in the area. And they launched the streetcar in May of 2016. And at that time, they had over $3 billion of economic development committed to that downtown corridor where that street line or where the streetcar line was going to be, and where our smart city effort is at the heart of. And what that led to were some interesting things shortly thereafter. They were competing also for one of those grants Robert was talking about, Department of Transportation grant. Kansas City was actually one of the finalists. I think Columbus ended up winning. But what happened was Kansas City actually won an award get anything for it except for a nice trophy and some pictures, right? But it gave them some credibility and some notoriety out in the marketplace. And what it led to was the Department of Transportation came back to the city, actually our transportation authority, and gave them a $30 million grant to address one of our underserved areas here in Kansas City. It's called the Prospect Max Corridor. And so more upgrades to transportation coming, this time really focused on, like I said, that underserved part of town. What shortly happened after that was the mayor got a call from Avis Rental Car. And Chris can talk and probably will be talking about this later on in his presentation. But Avis brought their connected fleet to Kansas City. We have 5,000 connected rental cars here in KC, and we're doing some interesting things with that data. And really, the CEO of Avis has been very vocal about the reason they chose Kansas City as their test market for their connected fleet, and it has to do with the city's willingness and openness and their smart city effort. Shortly after that, there's a lot of events and things like that take place around smart cities. There's been an event called Smart Cities Connect. It has been in Austin, Texas for several years. The Smart Cities Connect people visited Kansas City and shortly thereafter announced that they were going to have Kansas City be one of their Smart City Connect expo cities. That first Smart City Conference here in Kansas City, I believe, was in February. We had, I think the final number was close to 5,000 visitors in our city, and may not be very many visitors for a city like Las Vegas or some of the ones out on the West Coast. But out here in the wheat fields of Kansas and in Missouri, hey, we'll take 4,000 visitors in a week in our downtown area. And so just some interesting things that have taken place around economic development here in Kansas City, besides the technology piece of it, right? So I wanted to share that with you. And then lastly, at the heart of all of this is a private-public partnership, which is what Robert's kind of been touching on as something we're seeing out in the marketplace. And Chris with Exact and myself right now are up to our ears in RFP responses due to the street here in Kansas City, which is really a P3 RFP. And we're very excited about it. We're anxious to see how this thing plays out. But in our first phase of our smart city efforts out here in Kansas City, there was definitely a strong lean towards private-public partnerships with companies like Cisco, Sprint, and the city being at the heart of it. I'm going to go ahead now and take any questions you guys might have about Kansas City. And if there aren't any, Chris, I think the stage is ready for you.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to turn over to Chris now. So again, as you're setting up, Chris, you can come on up. Exact is a partner that we use to get to that line of business level that I talked about before. Cisco doesn't provide a smart city as a platform type product, nor do we do the data science using your historical data. Right, we're delivering real-time data, so you have to mix that with the historical data and then bring in crowdsource sometimes when you need it, and that's what Exact does. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Crosby.
Was there anything for Kent before I?
Nope. Okay. Have a seat.
Thank you, guys. So before we talk about technology and Exact and what we do, we're actually going to talk about macroeconomics and Scrabble. So if anybody needs to get some coffee now, I'll pause. So thank you, guys. I'm Chris Crosby. I head up Exact. I'm sort of a tech entrepreneur by trade. So for background, Exact is the third company I built. One of them we exited to Cisco about 11 years ago, so I spent some time at Cisco. So our partnership there is not completely coincidental, that we both ended up in smart cities and collaborating. So what Exact does, if you think of Cisco as connecting the unconnected in a secure way, we connect the data between the devices, and then we connect that data to the people and the jobs that matter most. We empower people to do the hard work and do that in a data-driven way. So a little bit about us, a few things we've done. Kansas City was really our first sort of anchor customer. Cisco invested early in that city, I think 4 years ago, as Kent said. I think Robert mentioned that the DOT kind of kicked, I think, the Smart Cities party off a couple years ago when they did the big $40 million grant proposal. KC Mo was one of the 7 finalists for that, and we helped them write a good portion of that proposal, which ultimately went to Columbus, except that when Kansas City lost that, we went to work building what we said we were going to build. And we did it with a lot less money than $40 million, and we had a lot more outcomes than what's come out of Columbus. We do a lot of predictive analytics, but we don't do predictions for the sake of doing predictions. What we do is focus on delivering the outcomes in a way that people can take action. So we can predict crime, like Robert said, but if there's nobody there to catch that prediction and do something with it, then all we're doing is inventing technology for the sake of inventing technology. And we have a lot of scars to show for that. So when we sit down and talk to City Hall, the first thing we talk about is, what does this look like implemented? Who's going to do what with this technology? Kent talked about Avis. We'll expand on that. That's a pretty powerful story. A few of our customers and partners, one locally that we're in the process of finalizing a contract with is the City of San Diego. They're deploying, as you've probably seen, 3,200 smart streetlight nodes with GE. We will be not just the city data infrastructure for that, but the smart city data program management of that. Again, it's not just about analytics, it's about the delivery of those insights and the change management that goes behind that. So again, before we talk about technology, I'm going to pose some questions that I want people to think about and sort of stop me and answer or question. And the first is, why are some cities smart and others not yet? Why is Kansas City a smart city and St. Louis isn't? Or is St. Louis a smart city? Well, the first question is, my slide did not scale the right way. That's supposed to say, why get smart at all? Why be a smart city?
To be more efficient.
To be more efficient? Okay. That's one outcome. One of the reasons that we talk about is what economist Ed Glazer refers to as the demons of density. So cities can be this amazing place of innovation and economic development and places to live, work, and play. But if we're close enough to shake hands, we're close enough to kill each other. If we're close enough to share ideas, we're close enough to share diseases, right? There are these urban problems that develop by the nature of density and by being close to each other. Then the second or third question we ask is, again, my slide should say, what does it really mean to get smart? So on the left-hand side of this slide is the picture of the first parking meter that was deployed in Oklahoma City in, I think, 1933. On the right-hand side is a smart parking meter contraption that's solar-powered and now takes credit cards. Is that really a technology advancement over the course of 90 years? Are we getting smarter? Which one was the first smart intervention? I think most people would argue that the thing on the left probably works almost as good as the thing on the right and had a more transformational effect on that economy and outcomes than the latter. The same could hold true in water. The Roman aqueduct was the first real smart irrigation and water system developed in 312 BC. Is that any more transformational now than putting in a smart water AMI, smart water meter? So the purpose of this is to really think about the lens of getting smart and the outcomes. What are we really trying to achieve when we put in the ability to accept credit cards or a mobile payment app? Then the last question I'll leave you with is, why doesn't all of this technology diffuse? Why doesn't it get adopted more broadly? Why hasn't it? If Kansas City 4 years ago started a journey to become one of the smartest, again, what does smart mean, cities on the planet, why hasn't that spread more widely? So on the left is a picture of downtown Kansas City, the corridor that Kent and Robert talked about. We'll show you some demos of that in a little bit. On the right is a picture of the inner city in St. Louis, which is a project that we're working on. So across the state, they don't get smart streetlights because they don't have streetlights, right? So we talk about economic development, but in a world where we can order sensors off of Amazon now and ship them anywhere in the world and put them on a streetlight or put them in the street, why isn't that happening? And if it is happening, why aren't we seeing the outcomes that are promised? Okay, nobody's asleep yet. So we think of this as, we think of the process of getting smarter as kind of like the game of Scrabble. So in Scrabble, the objective is to take different letters that you're given and arrange them to create words. Different words of varying length and complexity, right? We're taking raw material, if you will, and creating outcomes. Well, in the game of Scrabble, if I give you one letter, you can spell one word, and it's one letter long. It's not very complex. I want to think about complexity. If we look at this again from an economic standpoint, the poorest country in the world from an economic standpoint is Malawi. Malawi does one thing well. It's agriculture. They plow fields and they feed their local economy. They don't produce anything else. There's no exports. The most complex economy in the world is probably Germany. It's no coincidence that they have one of the highest GDPs in the world. So think of A as Malawi. But if I give you 3 letters, now all of a sudden you can spell 4 words and they're 3 letters long. They're more complex. We're getting more economic viability. We're getting more products. And then finally, if I give you 7 letters, there's 154 possibilities, according to Scrabble.com, and they're more complex. So now you can rearrange these capabilities and drive any sort of outcome that you want. But the question we get is, okay, so this is great, but how do I buy a vowel? And better yet, just give me the whole damn alphabet so I can start arranging stuff and doing stuff today. Which then asks the question, where to begin? And when we look at smart cities, we sort of see 2 different approaches. One is solution looking for a problem, and the other is the problem looking for a solution, right? I don't know that we necessarily have a preference. Well, we do have a preference, but we help cities with both. So in the case of problem looking for a solution, this is transportation, right? I mean, Robert spent a lot of time talking about some of the challenges with transportation. I sat on 405 South coming out of LAX today. I mean, these are real pains and problems that need answers. When we look at the other side of this, solutions looking for a problem, I look at San Diego, deploying 3,200 smart streetlights with parking sensors, traffic sensors, air quality, pedestrian counting, and no predefined outcomes. So the city came to us and said, look, we're on the hook now. We're spending $30 million to deploy this smart city infrastructure. We need to do something with this data. Can you help us? And we, of course, said yes. And that's where our Smart City Data Innovation Program that we're putting together with San Diego will come into play, which we'll talk more about. So this is all fine and great, but how do we apply this in a more concrete manner then to cities, to actually getting smarter? So we think of data and people and know-how as really the secret to getting smarter. These are your letters. This is Scrabble. On the left-hand side of this, you see Sherry McIntyre, who is the Director of Public Works in Kansas City, Missouri. Probably the least technical person you will ever meet, right? Which isn't untypical of the people that work in government, people that work anywhere. But she has a vision for using technology to help her be more efficient, to help them better maintain the city roads. So Robert mentioned predicting potholes earlier. We were in a meeting with Public Works probably a year ago, showing Sherry and her team all the whiz-bang cool stuff we can do on, smart parking and blinking lights and all that stuff. And she said, well, that's great, but can you predict potholes? And since I'm a tech guy, I said yes, not realizing how hard that problem would actually be. So what we did was we put our engineers, data scientists, software engineers, in the room with Public Works, and we stapled our knowledge together because we know how to massage data sets and predict things, but we didn't know was a damn thing about potholes other than we don't like driving over them. But when you talk to the people that maintain the roads and fill the potholes, they know a lot about potholes. They know about materials that are in the ground based off, different cement types and concrete. They know about spider cracking and alligator cracking and freeze-thaw events and things that contributed to that. So we acquired that know-how, right? That capabilities that's inside the City Hall, the tribal knowledge, if you will. Combine that with ours, and out came this map of likelihoods or probabilities of where potholes would occur and when. Now the hard part to this, one, it was hard to predict that, but the second part of this was now what? How do we metabolize this as a city? How do we operationalize it? How do we actually do something with it? And so now we're in that phase of the deployment with Public Works. This is, okay, now if you have a $40 million road maintenance budget that's about $80 million short of what you need, how do you use this new data, these new insights to better maintain the roads, to reprioritize that maintenance schedule? So predicting potholes is sexy, but actually preventing them in a way that is sustainable and saves city dollars, that's where the rubber hits the road, metaphorically and actually. So how does a city then start to develop the raw materials and the capacity, the capabilities to get smarter? Well, let's start looking at different letters. This is a picture of the sensors that are hanging on the streetlights in Kansas City. That's made by a company called Sensity that got bought by Verizon. It's almost identical to what San Diego's deploying for their streetlights, except they look better. San Diego's look better. That thing is going to do one thing very well. It will tell you if a vehicle is parked below it or not. As it turns out, that's an incredibly hard thing to do because you're running video analytics on the edge. You're moving data through a dense urban environment, through people, walls, and cars, thanks to Cisco, to deliver that data to the cloud, which to us looks like a 0 or a 1. But it doesn't tell you much else. So we can drive some cool insights with this. So if you combine that with, again, a data platform, some analytics and visualization, we can show you some cool trending. We can even drop that into a mobile app. But what that sensor won't tell you is that the reason that parking spot's available is because it's street cleaning day, and if you park there, you get towed. I'll show you a demo of San Diego later, which will, if you appreciate this, but we were doing a live demo for 25 cities right outside Petco Park, and it was game day, and the city closed off the road. Well, guess what? Sensor says 0 traffic, 100% parking availability. So what do you do with that, right? You've only got one letter, one capability. This thing does a couple of things well, right? And a lot of cities have these now, right? More cities have smart parking meters than they have actually smart sensors in the ground. It takes credit card transactions, but what spits out of the back of these things is actually a pretty incredibly rich data set. There's a lot of things that we can do with that that show trending. We can start to predict occupancy or guess occupancy. We can tell you where violations are probably happening. We can tell you where you should start thinking about putting sensors in the ground to drive the outcomes. If you want to know where you should focus on parking violations and compliance and turnover and occupancy, this data can show you where to drop in the other sensors, which then, when you combine these things together, now you can drive better outcomes. You can drive more things. So this is some cool charting and graphing. Actually, that is San Diego, I think. And then you can start to tell a connected vehicle, not where are the available parking spaces, but where should I park now based on what I want to do now, based on how long I want to park, where I'm going, who's with me. If I've got 2 kids in the car, I want to park in a different spot than if it's just me and the guys hanging out, right? So now we can combine all of that and make this stuff useful. On the last slide, sort of think about this ecosystem effect is as you're assembling these capabilities and deep competencies of, you know what, maybe the parking sensor only does one thing well, but so does a violin player. They do one thing well. Maybe the smart parking, contraption that takes your credit card only does one thing well, but so does the cellist and the bass player. When you put these things together, now you have a symphony that in concert sounds pretty good, or most of them do. And you start to gain then, Metcalfe's law and the network effect here, which is kind of like the old days of the telephone. If you've only got 2 telephones or 2 fax machines on a network, you can only talk to 2 people or each other. It's not all that useful, but the network becomes more valuable the more things that get connected to it. And that's what we're starting to do now from a regional perspective in Kansas City. So when you look out onto any city street, you see multiple, not just agencies inside City Hall that are responsible for things, but actually completely different entities, right? You have the local transit authority, you have the county, you have the city, you have sometimes the police department is separate, like in Kansas City. You have the state DOTs. So what we've done is start to combine those into one network now that are all talking to each other so we can do more things. So let's talk about what those things are. Any questions so far? Okay. So this is where Exact comes in. We view the world as sort of a 3-layer cake. At the bottom, we're connecting data. Cisco's connecting things, we're connecting the dots between those things. So the smart parking meter is talking and coming online, but it's not talking to the connected vehicle that's also online. We put in that data plumbing, effectively, to keep it simple. Above that is where we put in the context and location intelligence. This is the knowledge about the built environment. This is the parking regulation database that says, here's when street cleaning is going to happen. Make the sensor look like it's occupied, or put up the no parking signal into the mobile app. This is the economic data that says, how is crime really affecting the economy? Or how is the economy really affecting crime? This is our third-party data sets. This is knowledge of the environment. And then finally, on the top is where we put in our cognitive applications. This is predicting crime based off of all of the data inputs. It's predicting the potholes. It's driving the outcomes that the base layer of intelligence and knowledge enables. Throughout that, you have to have an open platform from the bottom to the top. So we open that up through, we have our own visualization engine, which we'll show you. We can embed this stuff in collaboration tools if you're using Cisco Spark as an example, fully integrated into that. My view is I've been building analytics companies for about too long, but I'll be the first to tell you that dashboards are where good data goes to die. You have to get the data and insights unhinged from a dashboard and into people's hands where they can take action. And then we open that up through our standard interfaces, so companies like Avis can come in and subscribe to that data. This was our, Accenture slide, if you will. It was just about how we do things, how we view our platform. So below the water is all the stuff we connect to: advanced geofencing capabilities, location-based data, data science, distributed data stores, all the techie stuff. But we put that below the water because we think it's our job not to talk about technology. We think it's our job to abstract the technology away from the city. I was in Kansas City Tuesday meeting with the chief data officer, and he looked at us and said, I don't care what database you use. I don't care if it's Hadoop or Redshift or whatever, just as long as it works and does what I need it to do. And that's our guiding light. It's like, look, we'll make it easy so that above the water, city, you can access the data the way you need to. We'll do the data science for you, or if you have your own capacity already. So Robert was talking about shared capacity across the region. San Diego has one of the best data programs and chief data officers in the country. Maxim Perchinsky is awesome. but he's only one guy trying to man all this stuff. So we can enable, again, through adding capacity to help him scale, help his department scale. But from a platform standpoint, now that we're not just collecting data, if you want to turn this into something that's usable, that enables data exchange, that enables regionalization, there's some core functionality you have to have. At the very bottom of this is, data ingestion. Oh, that's cool. We connect to Cisco's infrastructure. We connect to the open data portals, emerging data sets, mobile devices, that kind of stuff all can flow in. That's kind of commoditized at this point, and a lot of people can do that. The second level is where we start talking about the context, right? So as data's coming in, privacy is just in the early stages of being an issue and concern for cities. There's a couple of different case studies that we can look at and talk about, like the difference between what Kansas City's done, or like what Chicago's done with their Big Array of Things project versus like what New York City did with their Link NYC project with Google, and turned out to be a nightmare because nobody knows what data is being collected on who and how it's been shared. We empower the city to own the data, issue the data rights, to use the data as they see fit, to manage all of the privacy and governance right as the stuff's coming in. And then the policy side, that's where you put in how long can people park and where? What are the regulations? What are the things people need to know about the city? Where can you park one of the new dockless bikes that are showing up everywhere, right? And then the analysis, we have our own data scientists, machine learning, but then on this side of it is where we start to open that up again and put that into the workflow. And we have a guiding principle that we call rapid insight development and deployment. We want to get something in the city's hands as quickly as possible and iterate on it. So now maybe we're not predicting potholes at first. Maybe it's just giving the city visibility into where are the potholes. When was the last time a utility did work there? When was the last time these streets were torn up? Sometimes it's the basic vanilla stuff that gets you started. Always start with the data you have and then iterate. Then you can build out the bigger projects. And then, platform technology stuff, we're built in AWS 100%. So by nature, we get scalability, security. This is the only Visio slide I'll show you today. But this is sort of how Kansas City's laid out. Over here, you have Cisco Kinetic. Right there. For cities. I haven't updated the appropriate title there. So Kansas City, all of the parking traffic and Wi-Fi data is flowing into Kinetic for cities. We think of ourselves as sort of sitting beside that and above it because we're aggregating all the non-sensor stuff. So all the crime data, all the smart parking meter data, everything that sort of isn't necessarily connected as a device, that's where we come in, into what we call our MetroGraph platform. I put Kansas City and Las Vegas here because a key part of what we do is we push and develop and partner with cities to develop open standards, which means that if you come onto our MetroGraph platform, you are interoperable with 100 other cities day one. If Avis, which I drove an Avis rental car down here from LAX today, if they want to do a partnership with Irvine in one of your cities, you plug into this and they're Avis enabled. Also with this, so part of this, it was 6 a.m. Central when I was finalizing this deck and I forgot the Avis slide. But this is an interesting use case. So Avis came to the city back in December, Kansas City, and said, hey, look, we know you have all this data now. Right, Cisco's been hanging out here for a while, so Exact's here. We know you're doing some interesting things. How do we get that data into our vehicles? How do we enhance our renter and customer journey and experience using your data? In return, we're collecting a lot of data on the 5,000 vehicles that are connected in your city. Can we create a data exchange program? Well, the city said, we don't want your data in raw format. There's too many privacy issues, too many implications. Talk to Exact. And by the way, we don't have the physical infrastructure to deliver all this data to you. We can give you the raw zeros and ones, but Exact's already added the context to this. They've added the cognitive stuff to it, the interoperability. So what happened is we're now the data exchange layer, an intermediary, if you will. So Robert talked about monetizing data. We think of this as, so there is a commercial relationship between us and Avis where they're paying us to get city data. But what they've really done is subsidize, if you will, the infrastructure to acquire the data and get it in a format that's useful to them. So the city effectively got some free infrastructure on the back of Avis. Call it monetization, call it subsidy, call it whatever you will. This stuff will prove out, and there's a way to start to subsidize the expense of doing this. So what will happen then is later this summer, Avis will start sharing back with us the location of all 5,000 of their connected fleet. What we do with that is anonymize it, make that look like 5,000 traffic and parking sensors, and put that back into Cisco Kinetic, so that now the city's getting 5,000 free sensors, day one. By the way, Avis is connecting their entire global fleet of 600,000 vehicles by 2020. They refresh their fleet every 12 to 18 months. As they do that, every new vehicle is connected. So that means Southern California, guess what? If Avis comes to town, there's already a model built that can drive that change for you. And they have they see the disruption that's happening in the mobility space right now. They've seen Uber come. They've seen Lyft. They've seen Dockless. They've seen all these innovations, and they're trying to transform as a business, and they know to do that they have to partner with cities. They have to partner with you to be able to do that. So then finally, coming back to some of the technology, we have our Smart City Engage platform, which can drive the visualizations and analytics into this. We have what we're calling, that V to AI, vehicle to artificial intelligence. So Robert talked about vehicle to infrastructure. How does a car talk to the road? We want the car to talk to data. We want the car to get recommendations. We want the person driving it to know the best route. All of that gets served up on top of this. And then we have this bucket for the AI automation. We don't say AI just to be cool in Silicon Valley. If we wanted to be Silicon Valley, we'd be in Silicon Valley. We're in the Midwest. AI for us is really automating workflows, automating outcomes, using intelligence to drive those outcomes. So now we can plug a smart parking meter into a 311 system and detect when the thing goes offline, predict when it goes offline, and create the work order. No human involved. Can drive efficiencies. We can predict and tell the city, generate a new maintenance plan for those smart parking meters. Evanston, Illinois has a huge problem with batteries dying in their smart parking meters in winter. The vendor they chose, apparently they didn't think about Chicago winters. So what we've done is say, well, here's your proactive maintenance plan. So they were able to cut 311 call volume in almost half. And citizens are happier now because the meter works. They don't have to call 311. All of these types of use cases become available and as options based off starting with the data that you already have, plugging the stuff in. I think this is probably my last slide here. And I will not go a full 80 minutes, I promise. But, this is, we believe in empowering cities to drive their outcomes. We have seen too many vendors come in and say, hey, city or county or state, we'll give you free stuff in exchange for the data. We give you free parking sensors, but you're not going to be able to do anything with the data that we don't tell you you can do. We're helping cities take back that control and build their own data books, build their own rules of the road, start to aggregate and consolidate data that you already have. So we're actually going through an exercise in Kansas City right now, sort of as a function of that Avis relationship. Nobody knows where all the parking spots are in the city except some big back office database that nobody can talk to. So we're helping the city extract all of that data and get it into a machine readable format so that they can start to drive outcomes. So again, smart cities isn't always about the sexiness of hanging stuff on streetlights. It's about rolling up your sleeves, getting the data out into a place in the sunshine where you can start to use it, and putting that into normalized ways. Then it can, as you layer in the new smart infrastructure, it's infinitely more useful. And I can show you this actually in demo, but we do a lot of geospatial analysis. This is an example, though, of where we've been able to bring outside data to a city to help them get better visibility into mobility and transportation. There's companies that aggregate data from your cell phones, the apps on your phone that collect location data. There's companies that buy that and sell it to companies like us that can do some interesting analysis. So we actually did an analysis for LAX that was showing how often people are circling to pick up and drop off. And you can see the heat maps of like the TNC zones where Uber and Lyft are. So I should have put that screenshot in here. And there you go. Any questions comments before we do a demo? Robert? No? San Diego. Starting in Kansas City. So since this was the default landing page for Kansas City, I'll just show you this and then we'll show you the smart corridor. We're in a big project right now in a couple of cities, actually, but Kansas City is sort of on the edge of this. To leverage the 311 database, you guys know what 311 is? Call and report a pothole, call and report a dead animal on the street, code violations. To use that data to drive better city efficiencies and outcomes. So this is just some analysis we've done on that. It looks like for this week, the number one reason people are calling is missed trash and recycling pickups. And you can drill down into this and see, what the sub-issue is, and then actually drill right down into the actual cases that were opened in 311. We have some mapping on top of this too. We do real-time anomaly detection. So if you think about 311, when you sit down with the folks that run the operations, they'll tell you, look, we know we get a set amount of missed trash and recycling pickup calls in a week. What we want to know is when things are out of the ordinary. Tell us when there's a spike. Tell us when there's a problem. And so that's what we've done here, is start to give them the tools to isolate anomalies. So this is just some different charting functionality. But if we look at probably the reason we're here. When this loads, okay. So this is downtown KC, live, coming at you live from Kansas City, Missouri. On the top there is sort of an aggregation of the traffic counts rolling over the last 24 hours. This is actually a public dashboard. The mayor wanted to launch something, gosh, a year and a half ago that was visible to citizens. Even though it's only 2.2 miles of downtown, he wanted people to see, you know what, guys, this is the data we're collecting, and here's how you can start to use it. And oh, by the way, this is what brought Avis to town. And they said, wow, we've never seen this type of data before. So if you scroll down here, if I can figure out the mouse. Let's expand this out. You'll see an example of the raw ingredients in that slideshow that I went through earlier. So about almost every intersection, or at least where the hot spots are there, that's where the Sin City video nodes are deployed. That's the traffic and parking sensors plugged into Cisco coming back to us. That's just showing the rate of speed for all the vehicles. So when San Diego's fully lit up, we'll show you most of San Diego very shortly. Kansas City, though, this was what led to the phase 2 expansion. So Ken talked about the RFP that they've issued a couple weeks ago, which is to blow this out to another corridor and to start to generate more data and more outcomes. The green here is showing real-time parking availability. I'm surprised there's that much available parking. Kansas City doesn't have a huge parking problem, but it makes me think maybe there's a sensor problem that we should look at. We've learned a lot about how to present data. If you would have seen this a year ago, you would have seen individual parking spots, and you could zoom in and see exactly where to park. What we realized is that if you're driving and you want to find where to park, that spot's probably going to be gone by the time you get there. You don't want to try to figure out, how do I parallel park here? But what you want to know is, where's the best place, what block should I drive down to find parking? I'll show you our San Diego version of this. We actually tapped right into the smart parking meters and derived an algorithm that can do that without sensors. But that informs the sensor strategy, right? We've shown them areas of town not to even bother to put sensors because there's no parking revenue there, right? Here's your hot spots. Here's your areas where you should focus. And that blue dot is the streetcar. So Kent talked about the investment that was made in that. And there's some other use cases for that data that you don't see here. There's an issue. We should have shown this on the original picture of the streetcar. But because it goes down the middle of the road, if you're parked too close to it, you'll get your door taken off on the side of the street. So one of the use cases that Cisco developed with Sensity was there's a white line parked down the street, and if you're parked over that, it actually sends an alert to the police department. It's integrated in the video management system, in the parking enforcement agency, and the streetcar. So in real time, the person driving the streetcar knows there's a problem up ahead, don't kill the car, but then also parking enforcement knows to go tow. So thinking again about automation, and as you put this infrastructure in, there's a lot of different use cases that can emerge out of that. So I'll show you San Diego. I do know the real-time feed from GE is down right now because they're still very much in deployment mode. So I don't know if the Petco Park one is actually going to load a lot of data for you. Probably won't because this is the real time. Yeah, so it's down, but if you look at this map, the sensor was, so the sensor's right here, which is where we were doing our demo, and that's the road the city closes off during game days. But what's interesting is you can actually see, we'll show you a historical one, you can tell through the data when game days are by looking at the pedestrian counting numbers. So if we say, let's look at historical. Yeah, they've been down a while. So this is data that gets collected, mirror data to Kansas City. It just happens to be coming from a different sensor type. And is showing the city through that particular corridor, speed and velocity. We can also do things like turning movement studies, which again, we found out, not knowing anything about traffic a year and a half ago, it's pretty important for a city to know how many vehicles are turning which direction and when by time of day. We can populate all of that in here. We can show them, we had a chart in here that showed Comic-Con down in San Diego, and you just see this massive spike. Well, guess what? Now maybe the city can think about demand-based pricing in a data-driven way for events. So parking by hour day, we'll populate that one. And you can do this for any part of the city where it's deployed. And then we also came in, and again, just looking at parking meters as the starting point. Does anybody have smart parking meters? I know there aren't many cities in the room, but it's a good place to start. Not sure why that. Not sure if that's an internet issue or what the why that's not loading. Or it could be user error. I do tell our team, though, that I'm like the worst user, so if I break it, then somebody else will. Yeah, so here's another view. And I'm showing you San Diego instead of Kansas City because I think hopefully there's probably a little more context than streets that you probably don't know. So this is just showing a very simple view of how much revenue is collected over time by meter. And so when you zoom out, you can pretty quickly see where you should focus your attention. So these outdoor areas drive a lot less revenue than these downtown areas, which intuitively makes sense, right? But now there's that data-driven focus. So when Robert talks about golden miles with Cisco, we can help you configure that golden mile to drive the outcomes. Where should you be putting public Wi-Fi? Where should you be putting traffic sensors? We're going through a project with a city now that wants us to import in all of their traffic incident data for all the car crashes, where are people dying from vehicle incidents. Let's go put a connected intersection in there. Let's go put the infrastructure in there to drive data-driven changes. And again, this is just kind of showing different charting, different insights over time. But it's stuff that generally when you put it in front of a city day one, it's insights and visibility they haven't had before. And so we can have the conversation with them about, you know, how to use this data to drive change. Yes, sir.
Question about the GIS. GIS that you have connected in your platform, or are you downloading that to the city's GIS network?
Yeah, good question. So we have our own mapping and location functionality, but we're not an Esri replacement. So we'll, you know, we can pull data out of Esri and we can put data back in Esri. So what we do though is sort of, what we found is in most cities, Esri is pretty specialized use cases. The mayor's not looking at Esri to see, you know, where did people die yesterday on the map. So we do different things, but have some more functionality and can integrate across that platform. So I'll stop here. Anything else?